Today, we want to talk about the role of money in the economy and how, in particular, at least over longer spans of time, increases in money cause prices to rise, which is really more inflation. Let's start with defining money. By definition, money is a part of a person's wealth that can be used to facilitate transactions, to go to the grocery store to buy something, to get paid for a job. Wealth, of course, is much more than money. Money would be the currency that you carry around in your purse or wallet and you can pay for groceries, or that your employer might pay you in cash for a job. That's money. That currency is money. Of course, your wealth would include other things. It could include stocks that you own. It could include your car. It could include your house if you own a house. So wealth is much broader than money. Money is just a part of wealth that it's easy to use to make transactions. You usually don't buy commodities with your car, you buy commodities with currency in your wallet or something like that. It's important to recognize that in economics, money, as I've just defined it, has a different meaning than expressions like, hey, she makes a lot of money, or he's not doing too well, he's not making much money. That use of the word money really just reflects your income, so it's a common use of the term, nothing wrong with it, but in economics, when we think of money, we're thinking of these part of wealth that can be used for transactions. Another example I like to use is one time I was asked to give a cheer at the Stanford football stadium, and the cheerleaders made up a particular cheer appropriate for an economist like me, and this came from a movie. A guy's a down-and-out guy in a movie, and his friends would tell him, hey man, you're money, you're really good. So the word money was used, hey, you're worth something, you should feel better about yourself. So that was where the idea of this cheer came. It went, we're cash, we're money. There's a picture of me at the stadium next to the so-called Stanford tree and another cheerleader. What I learned, you have to say this 4 times. But the point here is money has many different meanings in everyday usage. Here are some examples. In economics, we want to think of it very specifically as the part of wealth used to facilitate transactions. Money can take all different forms. This is one of my favorite forms. The thing that I'm sitting here, and I'm on vacation, sitting on a piece of yap money. It's a gigantic stone with a hole in the middle, used on an island in the Pacific, and it's called yap money. And believe it or not, people had these big stones, and it would be a way to show how wealthy they were, to represent how much wealth they've accumulated over time. Obviously, kind of hard to take a big stone like that to the grocery store. Another famous example of a use of money, in prisoner of war camps, prisoners would use cigarettes as a form of money. Even today in prisons in the U.S., because cigarettes can't be used, people use cans of sardines as money. They need to have something to facilitate transactions, and quite frankly, if nothing else is there, people will invent ways to do it because it's such a convenience. Today, of course, money consists of things much more than just big stones or cigarettes or even just coin. In general, money consists of currency, again, the kind of things you carry around in your wallet, your purse, dollar bills, but it also consists of deposits you hold at a bank, because if you have deposits at a bank, say a checking deposit, you can write a check and make a payment for something, buy groceries, or someone can pay you with a check and you put it in your bank, a deposit. So the amount of deposits you have in a bank are really a form of money. They're a part of your wealth that can be used to facilitate transactions. This is one of the reasons why it's sometimes difficult to determine how much money there really is out there, because there can be different kinds of deposits. In fact, economists have a couple definitions for money. One is M1, which is currency plus what's called demand deposits. But you also can have savings deposits and time deposits, where you time deposit and put in the bank for a while. A saving deposit might get a little more interest. If you add those kinds of deposits to currency, then you have what's called M2, which again is currency plus demand deposits plus time deposits plus savings deposits. So there's different definitions, and one of the reasons why analyzing money in the economy and its effects on inflation is pretty difficult to do. Economists had found it useful to delineate 3 different functions of money when they think about it. One is the idea of a medium of exchange. This is the idea that when you go to sell something, you get money for it, and you can use that money to buy something else. It's a medium of exchange. Here's a picture of the children's character, Farmer Alfalfa, selling some of his produce to Grocer Cat, and Grocer Cat's giving him some money. That's money, a medium of exchange. And then Farmer Alfalfa goes to see the fox, and he buys some toys for his kids, a tricycle, he buys a necklace for his wife, and he's paying for that coin. So you can see that the medium of exchange here is that coin or currency. It would be much more difficult if Grocer Cat just paid alfalfa in terms of, say, bananas that some other farmer sold to her. Instead, she pays him in terms of money. And then, of course, he can go to get his necklace or toy from the fox. He doesn't have to pay in bananas because the fox might not want bananas, but the fox, of course, can take this coin because he can go then buy something else with it. So that's the medium of exchange. And when there's a shortage of the medium of exchange, people find something else out to use for it. And so that's the example of prisoners of war camps. There wasn't really money or coin to use, so people started using cigarettes to make these transactions. That became the medium of exchange. The second is a store of value. If you want to save some of your resources or your income for the future, you can save it in the form of money. You can put it in the bank, as in this picture, or you can keep it under your mattress if you want. Because the money that you store for the future represents how much you can use in the future. It's a store of the value you have. The store of value is the second function of money. Again, whether you put it in the bank, whether you keep it in your mattress, it provides this store of value which you can use in the future. There are, of course, other stores of value. Quite frankly, you could think of your car as a store of value. You have a car now, and maybe you want to sell it in a year or 2 years. It's still of value to you. So money's not the only store of value, but it's the most common one that we use, and one of the three functions of money. And there's finally this unit of account. Unit of account just tells you how much money you have to pay for something, whether something costed $1 or $1.50 or $4 or $1 million. It's a unit of account of how much things cost. Unit of account is different from the medium of exchange, and sometimes it's useful to think of cases where there's a country or an area where what's used for the unit of account is different from what's used as a medium of exchange. It occurs quite frequently. The example here on the slide shows you a currency in Zimbabwe dollars. It's a one single note that's $100 trillion. That one little note is $100 trillion. And it's because they printed so much money, there was a lot of inflation. We'll see how that works in Zimbabwe. And it became pretty useless as a unit of account because those prices were rising 100% a day or 50% in a few hours. And so it became kind of meaningless to say, I'll charge you so many $100 trillion for this banana in Zimbabwe. It still was the unit of account. People exchanged Zimbabwe dollars for bananas, but in terms of a unit account, it was not used as a unit of account. It was used as a medium of exchange. The Zimbabwe dollar was a medium of exchange. You would exchange it, but the unit of account became the dollar. So you'd say, well, this car is worth $2,000, or this house is worth $50,000. You'd pay for it if you buy it in terms of Zimbabwe dollars. So again, Zimbabwe dollars was a medium of exchange, but the dollar became the unit of account. They got separated, and that helps you understand what the difference is between medium of exchange and unit of account, and for that matter, store of value. A key principle of economics related to money is that the faster money is growing, the more inflation there will be. That doesn't occur immediately, but it occurs over time, and it occurs, as economists say, ceteris paribus, assuming other things don't change, holding other things the same. Because something can change to make inflation pick up, or something in the short run might make inflation go down even though money growth is going up. So you have to be careful when you use this idea. But the reason for it is pretty straightforward. And you can see it, for example, in the case of the Zimbabwe currency. A whole lot more currency was printed, more money was printed, and prices went up dramatically. The more money there's in the economy for a given level of production, the more higher prices will be on average. Therefore, the faster money is growing, the faster prices will grow, and by definition, and therefore, the higher the inflation rate will be. So that's the principle, and it occurs over history in many different periods, and we want to think about that and how economists think about it in the rest of this discussion. The most famous way economists describes this relationship between money and inflation is through the so-called quantity equation of money. It's been around a long time. Milton Friedman, the famous monetary economist, one time wrote, as you can see here, the equation plays the same foundation store role in monetary theory that Einstein's E equals mc squared does in physics. Actually, Milton Friedman was so fond of the quantity equation of money that he had his California license plates engraved with mv equals py. Of course, equal sign isn't part of the usual options for the letters on a license plate, so he just put the equal sign in with tape until the California Highway Patrol told him to take it off, and then later he'd put it back on. In any case, mv equals py is the quantitative equation for money, and so what does that mean? Well, money is represented by m in the equation. The price level is represented by p in the equation. Real GDP is represented by y in the equation. And then finally, there's this new concept, velocity, v, which represents how fast money turns over. And by definition, it's the ratio of p times y divided by m. P times y would be nominal GDP. Remember, it's real GDP times the price level. So it's really nominal GDP divided by the money supply. If for a given level of real GDP and the price level, if m is lower, if m is small, then it's circulating a lot. It has a high velocity. So a low value of m for a given value of p times y represents high velocity. If you have a high m for a given level of p times y, then money is not turning over that much. It's really low velocity. So the term velocity represents how rapidly the money is turning over. How fast does it go in and out of your wallet as you buy things over time? How much does your bank account change as you run it up and run it down over a month or over a year? That's the velocity of money. You can think about this equation in growth rate terms as well. And that's really comes from an important approximation that the growth rate of a product of two variables is equal to the sum of the growth rates of each individual term in the product. So for example, the growth rate of m times v is equal to the growth rate of money plus the growth rate of velocity. In short, money growth plus velocity growth is shown here. The growth rate of p times y is the growth rate of p plus the growth rate of y, or in sum, inflation rate plus real GDP growth. So when the quantity equation money is applied, we usually use these growth rate terms to do it. So consider an example. Suppose that money growth is 4% per year, and suppose that velocity is increasing by 0.5% per year, so velocity is gradually increasing. And also suppose that the inflation rate is 2% per year, and that real GDP growth is 2.5% a year. Well, obviously that adds up. 4.5 equals 4.5 on both sides of this equation. But now think about making the equation go to work. Suppose that the rate of money growth increases. Suppose it doubles from 4% per year to 8% a year. And also suppose velocity doesn't change too much. In fact, doesn't change at all. It stays at 0.5. And also suppose real GDP growth doesn't change so much. In fact, doesn't change at all. It stays at 2.5. What that implies is what's going to happen is inflation's got to rise. In this case, it's got to rise by the same amount that the growth rate of the money rose, by 4 percentage points, from 2% per year to 6% per year. So you can see you can use this equation to find out how much money growth will cause how much inflation, or in reverse, if you want to lower the inflation rate, how much do you need to lower money growth? And as you do this calculation, as you change the 4 to an 8, and therefore the 2 to a 6, you recognize that you're holding other things constant. That's ceteris paribus. The 0.5 stays at 0.5, and the 2.5 stays at 2.5. That's not always the case, and you have to be careful when you use this equation to make sure it is the case. It usually happens sort of in the long run, but in the short run, when you change money growth, as is illustrated here, other things can happen. So let's then ask the question, does the quantity equation of money work? Well, it works very well for big changes or over long periods of time. So, for example, it works very well in the Zimbabwe case. That was where you had a hyperinflation, inflation over 50% a month. It was gigantic. And you can trace those increase in money. You can see a $100 trillion note in the example as really causing that high inflation exactly through the quantity equation. It also works in periods of longer periods. It worked pretty well to explain the so-called Great Inflation in the 1970s in the United States. I want to take a look at that in a couple of minutes. It's less reliable, though, in the short run. And there's several reasons for that. One, we already alluded to, sometimes difficult to measure money. Should you include deposits? Or things may change over time technologically. It might be easier because of ATM machines to make payments with actually carrying less money around in your wallet. Or credit cards make it possible to have use of less money. So the velocity changes as well. In fact, the growth rate of velocity has declined a lot recently in the United States. And then the other thing is sometimes when the quantity of money changes, it affects growth rate. It affects what we had 2.5% before in the other example. It might go up if M goes up, might go down if M goes down. So that kind of muddies the water in the short run, makes it less reliable in the short run. And this is what makes money a very difficult policy issue. It's somewhat more complicated than the quantity equation suggests, especially in the short run. So there's been a long political debate about the role of money in the economy. It goes back in U.S. history. One of my favorite examples is the 1896 election in the United States, where William Jennings Bryan ran on the idea that we should not have a gold standard. The gold standard represented really more money, a restriction on how much money could grow in the economy. It was held to a certain level. Let's listen to what actually happened when William Jennings Bryan went to the Democratic National Convention in 1896.
The 1896 Democratic Convention with one of the most memorable speeches on an economic issue in American history.
We will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
It was a classically emotional them against us oration, and its appeal to farmers and other have-nots was electrifying. When Bryan finished, there was an awed silence, then pandemonium. 5 ballots later, the young Nebraskan, known as the Boy Orator of the Platte and the Great Commoner, had become the Democratic nominee for president.
Another example is related to more recent times, the 1970s. This is a picture of Arthur Burns, who was chairman of the Federal Reserve at that time. It's in a picture of Time magazine. And he was arguing that we shouldn't have an increase in money growth because it would cause inflation. He was thinking about that quantity equation of money. It's interesting to listen to what he told Congress in a congressional hearing when he was chair of the Federal Reserve. Let's listen.
Open up the spigot and permit the money supply to increase rapidly, because if we did, in our judgment, we would not be helping significantly to relieve unemployment, and we would be, on the other hand, releasing forces that could accelerate what is already a dangerous inflation.
Now, despite his warning that more money growth would cause inflation, unfortunately, he let money growth increase anyway. So in the 1960s, M2 growth was about 6.7% on average. In the 1970s, it rose to 9.4%. That was when Burns was the chair of the Fed at that time, saying we shouldn't increase the growth of the money supply. Well, it did increase. And as you can see in this picture, which shows you the inflation rate and how it rose from the 60s into the 70s, not uniformly, there's some ups and downs, but basically going up substantially. It corresponds to the fact that money growth rose. So this is an example where the quantity equation is consistent with what happened. It also tells you a little bit about the politics. Despite the promise that Arthur Burns made to the Congress, we shouldn't be doing this, it actually happened. We want to understand exactly why that happened as well. You can see this can go in reverse, but sometimes people get distracted about what's going on. They forget about the role of money growth. And this is an example of what happened just about 5 years after Arthur Burns was testifying. Now President Gerald Ford is running the executive office of the country as president. And he had another proposal to reduce money growth, to reduce inflation, I should say. It had nothing to do with inflation. It was kind of a strange idea. He said, well, people could wear these buttons, win buttons, whip inflation now. And here's what he told a joint session of Congress.
I will call upon every American
to join in this massive mobilization and stick with it until we do win as a nation and as a people.
Well, maybe a few people thought that would work for a while, but it really didn't do much to inflation. It remained high, and in fact, inflation did remain high until the late 70s, early 80s, when this person, Paul Volcker, was appointed by President Carter to run the Federal Reserve, and his objective was to reduce the growth rate of money and thereby reduce inflation. And in fact, that's what happened. So here's the picture of the inflation rate, and you can see the inflation rate came down under Volcker's chairmanship of the Federal Reserve. And you can also see that money growth came down, in this case from 9.4 to 6%. And so that's roughly consistent with the quantity theory of money that we've just shown. That's how you want to think about the quantity theory of money, the role of money in affecting inflation. And what our objective, having said this, is what's going to be the mechanism in a modern economy which controls that growth rate of the money supply, that allows for money like M2 to get higher or lower over time. We'll consider that next. Thank you.